Hi, my name is Adrienne Slater. I am doing my report on a book written by Ken Steele and Claire Berman. It is called The Day the Voices Stopped. It is about Ken Steele. Whenever he was 14, he was first diagnosed with schizophrenia disorder. Schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder in which personal, social, and occupational functioning deteriorate as a result of strange perceptions, unusual emotions, and motor abnormalities. A lot of people with schizophrenia may have hallucinations where they might see or hear things. They might even smell things that people without schizophrenia see, hear, or smell. In a lot of people's cases with schizophrenia, they hear voices that aren't really there. When Ken was diagnosed, he was just 14. The first time that he heard a voice, like most with schizophrenia, they were suicidal voices telling him that he should go kill himself. He was scared to tell his parents, so he just let it go. They kind of started noticing things whenever he was not really hanging out with any of his friends anymore in school. His grades started dropping when he was a straight A student. So he kind of started basically pulling himself away from society, like most do with schizophrenia. In Ken's story, he ended up in many different mental hospitals and halfway houses. He even ended up homeless. A lot of people with schizophrenia do end up homeless, or they do end up in mental hospitals back and forth constantly. Ken's voices did eventually stop, but they lasted for 32 years. Ken's story has touched thousands of people. Before Ken's death, he was a nationally recognized advocate for the rights of the mentally ill. He also published the New York City Voices, which is a consumer journal for mental health advocacy, and he was even the editor of The Reporter, which was a monthly newsletter of the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and he served as a spokesperson for the National Mental Health Association, which was called Partner in Care. People with schizophrenia, a lot of them end up abusing drugs and alcohol, which leads their life far more worse than it would if they weren't on, drinking alcohol or doing drugs. They've developed many more different health problems that they could avoid. Schizophrenia was first identified as a mental illness by Dr. Emil Kraepelin. It had been around for decades before it was actually identified as a mental illness. Written documents have even proved that schizophrenia can be traced all the way back to the Pharaonic Egypt. Whenever Dr. Emil Kraepelin did identify schizophrenia, he didn't use the word schizophrenia, he used the word dementia praecox, because he believed that schizophrenia was a disease of the brain and a form of dementia. In 1911, a Swiss psychiatrist, Eugen Bleuler, came up with the term schizophrenia. And that was when it was given its actual name. He knew that it was not a form of dementia, and he did not agree with Kraepelin's choice of name. One thing that Bleuler and Kraepelin did agree on was that schizophrenia was divided up into 5 different subcategories, which are now in the book of the DSM, number 3, which would be categorized as disorganized schizophrenia, catonic schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, residual schizophrenia, and undifferentiated schizophrenia. Whenever Ken was just diagnosed at the age of 14, he didn't know anything about schizophrenia or what it meant. So he did his own research by going to the library and pulling up all the information that he could. It was difficult for him because his family did not accept that he had this disease, so they sort of pushed him away. And that is one thing that is important with people diagnosed with this disorder, is that they have their family support. In Ken's case, he didn't have any family support. He really didn't have any friend support either until he moved away. When he was 17, he moved to New York City, where he met many different kinds of people. The first person he met was a guy named Ted. He took him home with him and promised him a place to live if he would do basically male prostitution for Ted's friend Nick. That was really hard on Ken, and it basically made his schizophrenia spiral out, which is when he made another suicide attempt as opposed to his first one when he was 14. This time he decided to go to one of the tallest buildings in New York City and try to jump off of it until people seen him up there. That's when he was put to his first mental health hospital. Being in there was one of the hardest things for him because he was transferred back and forth to many different mental health institutions. He was given medicine that would basically sedate him to the strongest point. He couldn't do the things that he liked to do, like read or write. So he ended up skipping out of there and going back to Ted's house. When it all happened again, he seen Nick and it put him back into his schizophrenia. So he left there again and ended back up into the mental health hospital. He did that many times. He did find, like most people with schizophrenia, it's hard for them to keep a job. But he did find jobs in and out, mainly doing like cooking for nursing homes. He even was an orderly a couple of times. He would end up back into the mental hospital, and they would basically put him in a padded room and tie him down because it is believed that most people with schizophrenia will harm you, and that actually doesn't happen as much as people think. Actually, according to our textbook, it is an estimated that at least 15% of people with schizophrenia do commit suicide. But according to an article that I read in WebMD, those diagnosed with schizophrenia, 20 to 40% attempt suicide. Ken did become really good friends with a guy named Carl, who did in fact commit suicide, but he wasn't getting any help, even though he did have schizophrenia. One thing that is really important for those diagnosed with this disorder is to have their family by their side, like I mentioned before. I know that giving up on them seems so much easier because so many people are uneducated with this disorder that they think those diagnosed are in fact suffering from insanity. Today, recovery from schizophrenia is much more common than it was 50 years ago because of new medicines such as the typical antipsychotic drugs, which is what Ken was eventually put on towards the end of his schizophrenia. The cause of schizophrenia is still not completely known. Some doctors say that it can be in your genes and develop as this disorder, even if a farther relative such as an aunt or uncle or great grandparent has it. Other doctors say that it could be a chemical imbalance in the brain, and even some doctors have actually proven that the ventricles in the brain are much more swollen with those that have schizophrenia than they are with those that don't. Another thing that doctors say is the cause of schizophrenia is environmental factors. It is believed that whenever a mother is pregnant with a baby and they had prenatal or even perinatal trauma that can be blamed for schizophrenia. Since signs don't show up until at least puberty in most males, it is so hard to kind of tell as when the child is younger. Ken's diagnosis was at the age of 14, and that's really rare because most male diagnosis for schizophrenia isn't until 21, and most female diagnosis isn't until 28. Ken was put on many different medicines throughout his stays at different hospitals, but he didn't like the way that they were prescribed to him because some of them were just too strong, and that's how it is for most people with schizophrenia, so they just quit taking the medicine. Treatment today for schizophrenia is much more different than it was even when Ken was first diagnosed. There is so much more research that is being done and so many more answers, but research isn't done, and there's still many more answers that they could find. Being medicated is not the only treatment that someone with schizophrenia has. They could do psychosocial support therapy, which helps them get on track with their life, because not people not with schizophrenia will always lead a terrible life. They can still lead a happy life, but they just need help finding jobs and such. It wasn't until Ken started talking to a therapist known as Dr. Rita Seiden that things started getting better for him. She actually referred him to a doctor known as Georges Casimir, and he was then put on Risperdal, which is a typical antipsychotic drug. And it wasn't until May of 1994 that Ken realized all of his voices had stopped. So as you see, the voices can stop. It's not always a bad thing as long as you get help. The prognosis for anyone with schizophrenia is a very good prognosis. The earlier it's caught, then the sooner they can get it taken care of. If someone has schizophrenia and it runs in their family, it might be harder for them to treat it as easily as it would be for someone who it doesn't run in their family. As in Ken's case, it didn't run in his family. But chances for recovery are still high for anyone with schizophrenia. Ken's story was a wonderful story, and it even states that it has touched millions, and Ken is known as an American hero for the mental ill. Ken did a lot in his life. He opened up a registry for mentally ill to vote, and actually had more than 37,000 people vote in just New York City alone, first-time voters who were mentally ill. So Ken really did leave behind a legacy. In October of 2000, Ken passed away, and his family said it was from a heart failure because he really didn't take care of himself like he should have. But he did develop sleep apnea and asthma and emphysema. Although he had schizophrenia, he was still able to live a very normal life once it was taken care of, and I think he led a happy life.